Hi. So today, we're going to start looking at a show that's kind of been in a weird place legally right now. Because the company that made it, the show Rooster Teeth, first they're an independent company, then they're bought up by Warner Brothers, then Warner Brothers shut them down, and now Viz Media owns them. I don't know, it's kind of weird right now. Nonetheless, I'm going to look at one of the most popular shows they've ever made, RWBY. Yeah, this was not one of those high-end, high-budget shows. This was mostly independently made at the beginning, and you can tell by the animation. So I'm going to take a look at this show, and before I start off, I'm going to look at the 4 shorts they made, mostly to get people hyped for it. That being episode red, episode white, episode black, and episode yellow. Let's start these shorts out and see how they are, starting with obviously episode red. The first short begins with a girl looking at a gravestone, and shortly after she leaves, she gets attacked by wolves. But luckily for her, she's packing heat with a really cool looking gun, which also turns into a scythe which can still shoot bullets. And the rest of the short is just her fighting these things with really well done animation for the fact that this was an indie made project. Not gonna lie, this is actually a pretty good start. Alright, next one. Episode White begins with a girl singing to a crowd, while also simultaneously cutting back to her fighting a giant metal knight with a sword. And during the fight, once she starts to have some trouble, we see that her sword has some elemental crystals, which we later learn are called dust. They all seem to have magical properties, and each one having its own element. And she does eventually defeat the knight, and the crowd is happy with her singing, but frankly, I was mostly left confused by this one. Mostly because of the back and forth. Episode Black begins with a girl hanging out on a rock, and her name is Blake. And the only reason we know that is because her partner shows up and calls her. Yeah, unlike the last two, this one actually has voice acting. It then goes on to show the two attacking a train, and when they get inside, they get attacked by robots, and as they make their way through, they make it to a cart full of weapons, and one of them decides to fill it with explosives. However, Blake shows concern, but him, not so much. And before they can argue about it, they get attacked by a bigger robot with, honestly, more really well done animation. And at the end, she cuts the train car saying goodbye to him. Yeah, this short I actually kind of liked a lot more than the last one. Anyways, on to the final one. The final short begins with someone riding a motorcycle, and should eventually stop off at a nightclub and ask the owner for info on someone. When he plays dumb to it, she starts interrogating him, which then spirals into her practically beating up every staff member in the building, including the DJ. And she proves to be quite a formidable fighter against everyone who tries to go after her. Things eventually escalate even further with the owner trying to fight her himself. He does not really that good, but once he accidentally pulls out some of her hair, she gets really angry to the point where she punches him out of the building. And outside, we see the girl from episode Red, and when the two start talking, we learn that they're actually sisters. The one with the yellow hair, her name is Yang. Yeah, she's the oldest. And that ends episode Yellow, and frankly, yeah, this one was the most fun. Okay, so those were the shorts, and I gotta say, it's quite obvious that they are improving as they go along, because the first one was mostly action, the second one experimented with the visuals, the third one should introduce, two people working together in combat, and episode 4 or episode Yellow, was, visually quite stunning in terms of all the details everywhere. As they went on, you can clearly see voice acting was introduced. And after these shorts came out, they actually made a whole series. And here's the thing. There's 2 ways to watch it. One in the episodic format, or if you own the physical copy, like I do. They actually edited all the episodes together as a movie. And they actually did that for most of the seasons. So, yeah, heads up, I'm going to be doing a movie version of this, season 1 breakdown, or volume 1, depending on how you look at it. Anyways, let's get right into the show. The volume begins with a little recap as to the world that this show takes place in. And this place has a creature, or at least a set of creatures, known as Grimm, horrible monsters which almost wiped out humanity, until they discovered this new power source known as dust, which is used to fend off these creatures and survive to this very day, creating their society. And then after this, we see a group of thugs start to rob a dust shop. While robbing the place, one of the goons comes across the girl from the episode Red Short, and when he tries to mug her, she pretty much picks a fight with them until it all eventually leads outside where she pulls out her sights and faces them all one by one. After this, their leader fires a flare at her, leading to his escape, and with that, she quickly gives chase. The thug eventually makes it to an aircraft and proceeds to throw a piece of dust at her and sets it off by shooting at it. However, she gets rescued by another woman who we later learn is a huntress. We'll learn more about that later. And she and the other girl try their best to stop them. However, someone on the plane comes out and shoots a bunch of fire at them, leading to them escaping. She then gets taken into custody where we learn that her name is Ruby. And during her time being questioned, a man comes out, that being Professor Osborn, who is the headmaster of a place called Beacon Academy. He questions her and he finds that her dream is to become a huntress. And in case you're wondering, the male term is huntsman. And those are the kind of people that are actually used to fight those brim monsters I mentioned earlier. And the headmaster is quite impressed with her skills, to the point where he actually lets her enroll 2 years earlier. And on her way there, we learn that her sister is also going. That being the girl Yang we saw from the episode Yellow Short. And another thing we learn on the right here is that all background characters are just black shadows. Yeah, you could tell this was this company's first time doing a fully 3D show. Right as they get there, Yang kind of ditches Ruby to hang out with her friends, and while left alone, she accidentally bumps into a bunch of luggage which belongs to the girl we saw from episode White. Her name is Weiss. And inside, most of her luggage was dust, and while carelessly spraying it around, Ruby accidentally sneezes an elemental explosion at her. Yeah, she doesn't take it too well and starts to scold Ruby, and immediately after, Blake comes in to give a proper introduction as to who she is, which she is happy about. But then she starts to bring up all of her family's questionable business practices, which cause her to leave in a huff. Ruby does try to thank Blake, but she's already walking away. So yeah, her first day isn't going too well. She does eventually meet up with a guy named John, which she mostly remembers as the guy who was constantly puking on the plane ride over here. They both start talking about their weapons for a bit until they realize they have to go to the opening ceremonies, and while there, Osmond does give an, I guess, important speech. Yeah, no one really knows what to make of it. And later at night, when they're all being forced to sleep in the ballroom, Ruby does try again to reconnect with Blake, or at least have some sort of a friendship with her, and it actually goes a lot better than their first encounter. The next morning, we get introduced to 2 more characters, that being Ren and Nora. I only bring them up because they're some of the only other characters in the first volume who aren't shadow people. I mean, yeah, they get much more character development later on, but in Volume 1, not so much. While getting ready the next morning, we see Weiss meet up with another girl named Pyrrha who she asked to be on her team. John does try to ask her what the teams are, and Pyrrha explains to him that at this school, students are usually put in teams of 4, which is who they'll be spending the rest of their time at the school with when they're studying there. While outside, Osmond explains that their first task here is to form teams, and to do this, he is going to send them all out into the woods, and every time they make eye contact with someone, that person will be part of their team. And while teamed up, he wants them to find relics and bring them back. And the way he separates them is kind of fun. He literally just launches them off into the sky, and this frightens John, seeing how he doesn't exactly have a plan to land safely. While running through the woods, Ruby tries to look for her big sister Yang, but instead she ends up running into Weiss, who doesn't exactly want to be partners with her. And around this time, we see Jean meet up with Pyrrha. While we see Yang trying to look for someone, she ends up getting attacked by Grimm, showing that this place isn't exactly the safest place to be. And while fighting the Grimm, she ends up getting last-second assistance from Blake, and since they met up, they become partners. We later cut back to Pyrrha and John, and John accidentally gets hit by a branch, and she ends up asking him why he didn't activate his aura. And oh boy, let me explain. Okay, so aura is technically this show's excuse for how every one of these characters can survive taking hits that would normally kill a person. I mean, granted, I am happy they have an explanation unlike some shows where they just take so many hits and does not die. And another name they have for this is called semblance. And this usually gives characters like extra abilities, so if you ever see a character use something that looks like magic or a superpower, that's why. And trust me, this gets way more confusing when actual magic gets introduced later in the show. And yes, I will get into that when I get into that. Oh yeah, also a side note, I will not be naming every single character's semblance. Why? Because the videos would be longer and I gotta get the pace moving. I will only bring it up if it's important to the story. Okay, now let's continue. And with that, Pierre decides to help Jean unlock his semblance, mostly to make sure he doesn't die during the exam. The last thing that happens around this time is when Ren and Nora team up. Yeah, I just thought I'd mention that. Then later cut to another team, that being Yang and Blake, where they actually come across the relics and we learn that the relics that they're looking for are actually chess pieces. Eventually everyone does meet up back together. However, they're all being attacked by a giant scorpion and a giant bird, so everyone kind of just grabs a relic and runs. And while running for their lives, they end up running into some more ruins which aren't exactly as stable as the previous ones, leading to them getting cornered. They end up deciding to split into two teams, one to fight the scorpion and one to fight the bird, and the way they take these things out is actually kind of cool. With the scorpion, they cut off its stinger, impaling it in the head, and for good measure, Nora hammers it in deeper to make sure it's actually dead. And with the bird, Weiss makes platforms with her resemblance just so RWBY can run up the mountain with its neck around her scythe, which leads to her decapitating it. Back at the school, everyone's assigned their team and team names. John, Nora, Pyrrha, and Ren become Team Juniper with John as their leader. Then we see Ruby, Weiss, Blake, and Yang become Team RWBY with Ruby as their leader. Let me quickly explain how the names work for these teams. Okay, so the way the names of the teams work is where they pretty much get the first letter of each member's name and form a word with them. Like with the previous team, they got John, Nora, Pyrrha, and Ren, and they put the first letters of each name together and they form Team Juniper. And with our main crew, Team RWBY, you can actually see in the title, like Ruby, Weiss, Blake, and Yang, and that spells Ruby. And they are aware that, yeah, the main girl, at least her leader, or at least their leader, her name is Ruby. So to make things simpler, if I'm referring to them individually, I will use their first names. However, when they're all together, I will use their team names. So if Ruby's on screen, I will say, okay, there's Ruby. However, if all four of them are on screen, I will say, there's Team RWBY. I hope this makes things easier for you in the video. So the next segment, or episode depending on how you're watching this, starts off with the girls more or less decorating their dorm room and setting up some really shoddy bunk beds and being late for class. Then the rest of the episode is Weiss being annoyed that she wasn't made team leader, and one of the professors even kind of chews her out on it, mostly saying that she was probably a rich girl that had everything handed to her. And Ruby's asking Osmond if he made a mistake in making her leader. He says he doesn't know on account of the fact that they're still new and he hasn't really done anything wrong yet. And the episode kind of just comes to an end with Weiss saying that she is putting in the effort to at least try. The next segment or episode is mostly Jean having to deal with a bully and him admitting to Pierre that he kind of cheated to get into the school. It doesn't really amount to much in the long run. However, the one important thing about this episode that's brought up are the faunus. Let me explain what they are. Okay, so the faunus are animal people. So if you see characters in the show with like an animal part, like with the one girl Velvet we just saw, she had bunny ears. And if we see a character with antlers or a tail or something animalistic, they're probably a faunus. And in this show, they're highly discriminated against as lesser people, and the next major part of the story really delves into this. Anyways, the next real part of the story kicks off with the Vital Festival getting ready, and Weiss is excited because it's mostly an event where people from all the different schools come together for a big tournament. And while observing the grounds, they end up coming across a dust shop that was robbed. While eavesdropping on the detectives investigating, the detective deduced that the place might have been robbed by a group known as the White Fang, which are a group of faunus. Weiss calls them a bunch of thieves, while Blake tries to describe them as misguided. And speaking of faunus, we see one leaving a ship, this one being named Sun, and as you can see, has a monkey tail. While causing mischief, Team RWBY decides to go follow him. However, Weiss ends up bumping into someone, that girl being Penny. While talking to her, they question what she's doing, and she says she's here to enter the Vital Festival. They kind of find it odd that someone so absent-minded would enter. Nonetheless, Weiss asks her if she's seen that one guy from earlier. She says no, and then White gets into a little rant about all Faunuses are more or less just thieves and criminals to her, and her and Blake start arguing about some more leading into the night. While arguing, Weiss finally comes clean as to why she hates Faunus so much, and that's mostly because they've been terrorizing her family for as long as she can remember. And while she continues to talk about them as lesser people, this angers Blake to the point where she accidentally blurts out that she herself is a Faunus. Out of the awkwardness, Blake runs away, and while running, she takes the bow off her head, and we see that she actually has cat ears. The next morning, we see that Blake started hanging out with that guy's son from earlier, and while they have tea, she goes on to tell him a story about how she herself used to be a member of the White Fang. And mostly because when she was a kid, they were fighting for equal rights between Faunus and humans. However, over time, they got a new leader who took things to the extreme to the point where people only start looking at Faunus equally, but not out of respect and out of fear, and so because of this, she left. And at the end of her short was actually the moment when she left the group. We then cut back to the rest of Team RWBY who are trying to look for Blake, and while looking for her, they come across Penny again, and when they explain the situation to her, Penny blurts out how she kind of already knew Blake was a Faunus, which kind of makes things awkward, seeing as how someone they met yesterday could figure it out, while these guys who have been spending days with her couldn't even realize it nor knew about it. And when they ask her to help look for Blake, the rest kind of leave RWBY with her, while Weiss and Yang go off to do their own thing. Blake and Sun start talking about how to clear the names of the Faunus because everyone thinks they're the ones who robbed that shop and all the other robberies around town. They get the idea to go to the docks because recently Sun got intel that a huge shipment of dust is going to be left there. So they have a stakeout at the docks that night to see if any Faunus or the White Fang were involved at all. An airship does eventually land, and Blake's fears come true when she realizes that, yeah, the White Fang were involved. However, they're taking orders from a guy who's not exactly a Faunus but human, and it's the guy from the beginning of the volume, Roman Torchwick, who RWBY had a fight with. Blake quickly restrains them and tries to ask the other members of the White Fang why they're doing this and even working for a human. However, Torchwick gets free, and Blake and Sun end up having a pretty epic fight between the White Fang and him, and it all eventually leads to RWBY making it there. However, when RWBY gets ready to fight, Penny shows up distracting her for a quick second, which leads to her getting shot. RWBY is fine, however, Penny is angered by her getting hurt, so she ends up joining the fight, and we see that Penny is a really powerful fighter, and might not be human nor Faunus, because as you can see, swords are coming out of her back, and there are some shots where you can sort of see cables controlling them. Yeah, even on the Blu-ray it's kind of hard to see, but they are there. And eventually, once airships come in, she fires a massive laser destroying them, ending the fight. And unfortunately, Torchwick gets away. After all the chaos, Weiss and Yang eventually meet up with everyone, and Weiss more or less tries to apologize to Blake and says she is more willing to, well, have her the teammate despite what she is. After the apology, RWBY points out Penny is missing, and we see that she's in a car with someone who probably knows what she is. And the season more or less comes to an end with Osmond in a text chat with someone named Crow. We then get a post-credit scene where we see Torchwick talking to three mysterious people. We'll learn more about who they are in the next volume. And that was RWBY Volume 1. And as a setup arc, it's actually not too bad. Like, we get introduced to the characters. Granted, some get more development over others, but then again, with such a large cast, that's to be expected. Nonetheless, I enjoyed RWBY Volume 1. It was simple and nice. Now, I'm going to be looking at the first 3 volumes of RWBY. I just did 1, so next time I'm going to be looking at Volume 2. And then after that, Volume 3. Why the first 3 volumes? Well, like I said, RWBY's in a weird place right now, so I figured, I might as well just look at the beginning, and Yeah, the creator of RWBY passed away while working on Volume 3, so since that was the last volume he worked on before going away, I figured it'd be a nice place to stop there. For now, at least. I'll get more into that at the end of Volume 3. Anyways, I thank you for watching.